This is the Stacking Days Podcast, the podcast about the healing experience of recovery for people of color by people of color. This show is for the purpose of education and connection and is not a replacement for therapy or recovery care. We suggest you seek out the support of a trained professional for guidance with your specific circumstance. I'm your host, Ray Donovan, and I've been alcohol-free since September 2021. Welcome to the show. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Stacking Days Podcast. I'm your host, Ray Donovan. Really looking forward to the episode today. I've just kind of, in short, have been connected with our guest on some other activities within the recovery and sober space. And I said to myself, I absolutely need to get her on the podcast. So I have Leia Baez today. You know, she, as many folks are who joined this show, is doing so many incredible things today. And I can't wait to get into all of those. But I want to hand the mic over to Leia to give us a proper introduction of herself, what she's up to, and then we'll get into her story from there. Leia, welcome to the show.
Ray, thanks so much for having me. Super excited to be here. So like Ray said, my name's Leia Baez, and I'm an author, I'm a speaker, and most importantly, I love to be a sobriety advocate. I'm almost 4 years sober myself, free from drugs and alcohol and all substances. And that has been a game changer in my life. Where do I begin? This is such a big question, right? Like, where did I start? So, I started drinking when I was 13 years old. I was, a party girl, and for me, that's how I found my people. I tended to want to hang out with the vibe and the loud and the people party and have a good time. And so I took my first sip, don't laugh, of a natural ice beer when I was 13. Natty Ice, and so for me, that was like, cool. And, people, my friends were doing it. And I tended to also hang out with the older crowd a little bit. So I was hanging out with 15 and 16 year olds, and, we would drink. And so that was the first time that I kind of got introduced into the party scene. And it wasn't because I had like a bad home life or I, had any, like I had both parents. My parents were both very hardworking people, raised with strong Mexican American culture, and very driven on that education is our ticket anywhere. And my father was very vocal with my brother and I about that. And so it wasn't like I had a hard life at home, but I still found myself, wanting to be the rebel, if you will, or, party and do things. And so binge drinking. I was a binge drinker. And so I started to really see that amplify in high school. And then I went on to college, and I was still actually pretty successful though. I mean, I was still doing well on the surface, right? So I was, an A+ student, and I got a full ride, to college based on my academics. So on the surface, I was doing what my parents wanted me to do, right? I was still taking care of what my dad said needed to be done, and that was education first. But I would always come back to this other side, this darker side of myself, and that was drinking, which sometimes would lead to drug use, marijuana for me, and cocaine was my drug of choice. And it was the party thing, and so I was just this party vibe all the time. I wanted to party. So school during the week, party Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and so it just amplified though through college. And in college, there is a drinking day every single day. So there's a college night on Monday, and Tuesday night is ladies' night. And you can't like go out without getting this drink special for college students. So we went out every night, and it just continued to get worse and worse. And I noticed things, I noticed myself starting to gravitate toward unhealthy relationships and things that probably I knew my parents worried about because of my choices with substances. Then I started to also have unhealthy, decisions in other places, relationships, and, what my future might look like and things like that. And so alcohol, like I said, from the start, when I was 13 years old up until I quit drinking in 2019, it's been a struggle for me.
Wow. There are parts of that I certainly resonate with, such as, number one, at a young age, trying to fit in, with a peer group, that drives a lot for my story as well. In your experience, being that you came from a healthy household, did your parents at that time when you were 13, 14, 15 years old know that you were leading this double life of, kind of going hard on the weekends, but, or when you could, and, even though you were holding up your end of the bargain as far as education was concerned?
So a little bit. So my parents kind of knew I was running with the wrong crowd, if you will, when I was in junior high. So instead of going to the public schools, they actually sent me to Catholic school because I was kind of running with the wrong crowd. They knew I was like to have fun and party and probably make ornery decisions. But to them, they also saw that I was still really successful in school in terms of my academics. And so it really didn't, I think, click for them that I had a problem. I must say, though, my parents also indulge, my dad drinks, my mom drinks, they're very hardworking people, too. So it was always like, go, work a hard week and, we can have some wine or we can have some drinks afterward. That's normal for them. And I don't know that I didn't drink at home where they saw me getting wild and stuff. So they probably didn't see that side of me. And I was really good at hiding things. Yeah. I must say I was really good at putting on this front, that I was still this, just A+ student, and successful student. Cause, for a while, other than running with the wrong crowd and my parents starting to see some of the friends I had, they didn't have any red flags, I don't think.
I feel like sometimes there's this myopic view in immigrant families where, like, as long as you're taking care of the education piece, like, and you're holding that down, that you almost can do no wrong otherwise. And I guess in your situation, if you're very good at kind of hiding up the secrets that you don't want to expose, then, how would they have, known that there was an issue that maybe they need to get in front of?
Right. And so, it's like kind of this weird thing, like my parents, my parents are second generation, so they're actually born here. So they're pretty hip to like what's going on. But like this at the same time, like I was just really good at, I think, covering my tracks and making sure, that they didn't know, the truth and that sort of thing. But, my mom, don't get me wrong here. I did get a lot of scolding. My mom was on me all the time because she knew a little bit. She knew that I was partying probably too much. And, I had a fake ID when I was 17. So I could go to the bar at 17 years old, and my parents knew about that, found out about that and got really upset with me. So I was, like I said, in the bar many years, 5 years before you're legally allowed to, and so that just made things worse. And I would go buy all the booze at the store, and bring it to my friends. And it was that's just what we did. And it's not because I live in Nebraska, because, people will think like, hey, Omaha, you must live on a farm. And I'm like, no, this is like a city. We have like a city. I don't live on a farm. There's more to do than just drink here, I promise. But, a lot of people do kind of like, think it's out of boredom that we're drinking and that sort of thing. And for a long time, I think that it took me a long time to come to the realization of why I was drinking. And so I, growing up in a Mexican American household, my parents never went to therapy. So let me just throw that out there, because therapy, we didn't talk about therapy. So when we had things to heal or we had problems, we turned to our religion. We're very strong in our faith. And we also just are like, told to keep going. We're strong, we're resilient people. We have to keep fighting forward. But I was hurting, and I didn't know that until much later in my life as I'm going through this really hard transition in about 2015. But I was hurting, and I was holding in some really hard, emotions and stuff that I had held in for many years from some childhood trauma I experienced. I was sexually abused as a child when I was about 5 years old. And I didn't even realize that until I started therapy, that I had been compartmentalizing so much of that trauma. And I had been coping all these years by drinking. And so I didn't even know that there was like this relationship between trauma and substance abuse, or trauma and, binge drinking, until I went to therapy, as an adult in my 30s. And the crazy reason this even came about was because in 2015, and this is kind of my breaking point, my low point, 2015, I felt like I had everything. I was married. I had a home. I purchased my own home. I was an award-winning journalist. I had all these accolades and great things. And I was still struggling with alcoholism. I was still binge drinking, making poor choices. And one night I made a really bad decision that put my daughter in danger. And I didn't realize it because I had blacked out. And so what happened then was the next day, my now ex-husband filed for divorce. And so I ended up going through this like literally one moment changing your life forever kind of thing where overnight, literally I had nothing. Like my daughter, I had lost temporary custody of my daughter. I was getting a divorce. I was getting kicked out of my home. And now I'm forced to move back home with my parents.
Wow.
And the reason I share that is because, wow. So going from having everything to realizing that this, alcohol has made has had such a stronghold on my life that now I'm questioning my worth. Now I feel like I have nothing. But all of this led me to therapy, all of these things where I was able to uncover that trauma, and realize that it's not my fault. It's yes, I realize I had the power to make some choices, but I also had some really hard things happen in my life that were having an effect on me, and I didn't even realize it. And so my daughter was the same age I was. So she was 5 at the time, and that was the same age as when I experienced that. And so I started having these night terrors of that, and I would talk to my therapist about it. And he was like, well, what's happening is you have PTSD, and so now you're seeing that happen to your daughter, and it's affecting you. So basically saying you've never healed, you've never gone back to that trauma to work through that. And so as we did that, we were able to realize wow, all these decisions I've made in my life, all these, the way that I coped and the way that I was handling myself had to do with that. And I had no idea. And it was just the most difficult, yet so freeing, because it was so hard for me to make sense of that, because I really hated that, because I hated that time in my life. I didn't tell anybody about it, and I regretted that so much. I wish I would have told somebody at the time, but I was afraid because it was a family member. And there were so many things, that came into play there. But after the fact, I look back and I'm like, wow, being able to share this story or being able to tell people that it's okay to go back and heal those things that we're afraid to talk about. It took me 30 years. 30 years later, I'm still working with my therapist to heal things that happened to me when I was 5, and I'm 40 now, so, it's okay to do that. And I feel like when we can own our stories and when we can own the things that we experience, it's just this newfound freedom I have. I feel proud of myself. I feel like I can walk and hold my head up high, and I'm not afraid to say that this happened, because now I can help others. And, my daughter is proud of me, and she's amazing. And, to see me do the work that I do as a speaker and a sobriety advocate and an author. I mean, to me, that's the icing on the cake, but I wouldn't be here telling you this, and I wouldn't be in this situation had I not gone through that really hard stuff. So, I mean, if people say, do you regret that happening to you, or do you regret having to go through anything? It's I don't think our paths are up to us. I think this is part of my destiny of who I'm supposed to be. And, that includes my addiction and also my recovery. And, I feel really grateful that I can, share that with others now and kind of be a light for somebody who might be struggling.
Well, I mean, that is, extremely, impactful of a story. And firstly and foremost, I'm sorry that you experienced what you did when you were 5. I have young ones myself, as I mentioned before we, recording, and also, and putting a child, in that position, it's unfathomable to me. And, how powerful is it that you've been able to, through a lot of pain, have gotten to a place where you've been able to break that cycle with, within, your family and, for your daughter, and her not having to deal with some of that, some of the rougher times that maybe you did for different reasons, maybe. I think that's extremely impactful. And I guess the question that I have is, and you're going through, you're going through therapy. At what point over the course of your therapeutic journey did you say to yourself, okay, because this is 2015, right? And we fast forward 4 years to 2019. At what point did you get to a place where you say, okay, I've done a lot of personal, foundational work through therapy. I'm still kind of working through a lot of these challenges in my life, but I've got to remove this alcohol in addition to some of these other substances that I lean to cope for, the pain that I've been trying to work through. What got you to that point, and how did you make that transition, over into 2019?
Yeah, that was, I love that you asked me this, because this is such an important testimony that, I wanted to quit. I wanted to quit in 2015, but I couldn't. Like, it was hard for me to accept that I was the problem, that alcohol was the problem. So for me, like, okay, so this terrible incident happens in 2015. My daughter, I lose custody of my daughter. I have to move back into my parents' home. So basically, like, I'm like demoted in life, I felt like, right? And so I'm going through all this hard time. And I was sort of grieving too. And so, like, how do we grieve? I know as an alcoholic, I grieve by drinking. And so, like, I didn't stop drinking because the night that happened, I believed that I had been roofied because I would have remembered something. And so part of my brain was like almost blaming it on that. And I wasn't the problem. I didn't have the problem. I was still a little bit in denial. And so I just kept drinking. And so even now I'm living with my mom though, and living with my parents and my daughters. I get visitation with her. And, so when she's with me, I don't drink. But when she isn't with me, I was still partying like I was before. And I think it was because that part of my brain was still not ready to give it up. And I was, like I said, blaming somebody else. I wasn't taking ownership of this addiction. I was saying, oh, somebody roofied me that night at the party. That's why I blacked out. That's why this happened. I'm good. Right.
Sure.
In reality, no, I was struggling. Yes, I probably was roofied that night, but that still didn't mean that I didn't have a problem. I had a problem. I wasn't ready to own that yet. But it was through therapy, and it was also through some other kind of spiritual experiences, I like to say, is and not to go on forever and ever, but in 2019, like I knew I wanted to quit drinking in 2015. So I even told my therapist, I'm cutting back. I tried to cut back, but I really kind of was lying to my therapist because I wasn't cutting back. And so I kind of was telling my therapist what he wanted to hear, and it wasn't true. And so at some point I had to just be honest with him and be like, look, I'm drinking still just as much as I was before. And it's because I'm stressed and I don't know what to do. And so, we walked and talked through kind of like some different, methods and things I could consider to get, more help. But it wasn't until 2019 when I was forced to go through kind of a medical emergency. I had a tumor the size of a cantaloupe in my uterus. And so I was basically rushed into the emergency, had to have a hysterectomy. And I felt like God was telling me, like, you've got to take care of yourself. You've got to do something to take care of yourself. And I felt like for a long time that I knew I had to quit. I just didn't know how. And so not that long before this happened, one of my uncles, right before, like, I would say not long, I don't know, maybe like 2 weeks before I had surgery, my uncle passed away from cancer. And had he not been a big drinker, he probably would have survived. But his liver couldn't process the chemotherapy like a normal healthy person would. And so he passed away. And it was like all these things at once coming at me that were like signs, I felt like, that I needed to like reconsider. But then it gets kind of really like trippy for me because so I had my surgery and I had a dream like in like recovery that my uncle came to me and he like grabbed me by my shoulder, and I wrote about this in my book. So I'm not giving away any secrets or anything, but he grabbed me by my shoulder and he just looked at me and he had this really loud, boisterous laugh, and he was just kind of laughing at me. And he was just like, you don't have to drink, almost like you don't have to do what everybody else is doing. You know what I mean? Like, duh. And I was like, oh my gosh, I don't have to drink. Like, what am I thinking? And it was just like this, it just clicked for me. And that was on, so November 7th, 2019 is my sobriety day. I actually had surgery November 11th, but I had to stop drinking prior to surgery so my blood wouldn't be thin. And so that happened on, crazy 11/11. I know I'm very woo woo, but I'm very into like these numbers and things. But like that for me was it. Like, you know what? This is it. Like, I don't have to drink and I'm not going to drink. And it hasn't been easy, but that was my last time. I was still in the operation, recovery room. And I looked at my boyfriend at the time and I told him, I said, I'm not going to drink anymore. And he's still my boyfriend, but, I looked at him and I said, I'm not going to drink anymore. And he just laughed. He's like, okay, you're probably just like still high from the meds and the surgery. And I'm like, no, I'm serious. And, but that was it. That was the last time because of that dream, because of that like spiritual moment. I felt like I had like this awakening with my uncle. Like he was just, and he was my drinking partner back in the day. So it was a big moment. It was a big moment for me. And, it still gives me goosebumps thinking about that.
Wow. Well, shout out to Uncle. I mean, that's awesome. And it's amazing to me. There are signs all around us, right? And I don't want to get too woo-woo for the audience out there, right?
Sorry, I just took this to a whole nother woo-woo level. I know, but
it's all good. It's all good. I mean, there are signs all around us, and I think that for those who are able to pivot into a life of sobriety, it really just takes listening to one of those signs one time, right? And just really like internalizing it to the point where you can step into like something that you alluded to earlier, like you almost feel like you're ordained to do, right? And it came in your uncle in a dream when you probably need it the most, I believe in all of that, for the record.
We're on the same level then.
Yeah, side note, I've seen 11/11 on my clock like the last 4 nights in a row, and I'm just trying to figure out what is it trying to tell me.
Right. So, it means you're on the right path, Ray.
Yeah, I like to think that for sure. All right, so we're in November of 2019. You have this, epiphany of a dream that you buy into. You tell your boyfriend, I'm not drinking anymore. He doesn't believe you, but it doesn't matter because you believe you, right? What did you do to step into sobriety? How did you support yourself in those early days when it was so kind of counter to how you conducted your life otherwise? Like, how did you do it?
So the crazy thing about it, and this is like another sign, it was like a friend of mine that I knew through a CrossFit gym here in Omaha. I had like worked out with this woman in the past. We had a lot of mutual friends, but I didn't really know her personally. But we worked out at the same gym sometimes. And she had just posted on Facebook about her sobriety and that how she was just thriving in sobriety. And I was like, okay, I need to connect with her because I need like-minded people, right? I need somebody to understand where I'm coming from. And I probably need a mentor. I, like you, Ray, also tried AA in the past. And it wasn't that it didn't work for me. I just think that I wasn't ready for it. And like, I'm totally open to trying AA again, even, and I've done some meetings online, but I've never completed like the STEP program. But at the time when I tried AA, I just wasn't ready. But when I knew through everything in life, like I have mentors, like for my career, I have mentors for life. I just always have people that I like to lean on. And so I knew that I needed somebody in sobriety. That was like a given. And when that came up on my Facebook feed, I was like, and we weren't even friends. It was because a mutual friend had shared something or, of her. And I said, okay, I need to connect with her. So I messaged her on Facebook and I introduced myself, and she said she remembered me from the gym, and she's like, would you like to get dinner? And I was like, I would love to. So she was like, I also have another friend who reached out to me who wants to meet up because she's also interested in being sober. Are you okay if I invite her too? I'm like, yes, more sober people, the more the merrier. And it was probably like the most pivotal moment for me because here I am at dinner with these two women, and both of them are super successful women. And it was so comforting to know that you could be so successful and yet struggle so much, right? Because that's how I have felt for so long. I was struggling for so long, but yet on the surface, there was this facade of success and all these, accolades and accomplishments. But yeah, I didn't feel those, I didn't feel those because I wasn't living that way 100%. And so we ended up going for dinner, right? We ended up being there for like 4.5 hours because we couldn't stop talking. We were sharing blackout stories. We were sharing stories of like, forgetting where your car's at. Dude, where's my car? All these crazy stories. And it was just so empowering to be surrounded by women who like want better for themselves and also who recognize that it's okay to struggle and it's okay to not be okay, and I think that was the biggest thing because, for us, like we were all willing to admit like we had a problem. And I think that was what's so beautiful. So anyway, this little core group of women, we started calling ourselves Sober Support Sisters, and it just continued to blossom. And we created our own little group and we still talk. I wrote about them in my book. We still talk all the time. And if one of us is having a weak moment, our group chat gets lit up, And the other thing I love too is like in the beginning when I didn't know things, I would text Joelle, my sober sister, and I'm like, okay, this just happened. Is this normal? She's like, yes. And one of those things were, I don't know, Ray, I'm sure you've experienced this, but like a drunk dream. Have you had your drunk dreams?
Yeah.
So I like had this terrible drunk dream.
Just to interrupt you. When you mentioned like not being able to find your car, I've actually had a drunk dream where I woke up in my dream not being able to find my car.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah. But yes, I'm definitely familiar.
So I was freaking out because I literally was like, I woke up and I was literally ready to cry because I thought that I had gone out the night before. So I'm checking my text messages, making like, did this happen? And then I'm like, oh no, I don't have any text messages. Like I thought I got in a big argument with my daughter's father, my ex-husband. But then I didn't see any text messages. I was like, maybe I deleted them. And then I'm like looking through, just trying to remember. And I'm like, I don't think this is real. I gotta figure this out. And so then I called my mom and I was like, Mom, where were you guys at last night? And she's like, Leah, you went to bed early. You watched a movie and fell asleep. And she's like, and she was like explaining to me and I was like, oh my God, I thought I went out and got drunk and I thought I messed up and it was, it was probably like 3 months in, I would say, to sobriety. That was my first real one. And I was like, I thought I just blew it. I thought I messed up and gave in. And she's like, no. And I was like, wow, that's crazy, right? What our minds can do to us. Whew. Yeah. So yeah.
Thank God you had your community to turn to admit so you didn't feel like you were crazy.
Right. So I text them and I was like, are these real? She's like, yeah, you had your first drunk dream. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was terrible. I hope I never have one of those again. I did, but it wasn't as bad because I was kind of prepared for them.
Well, I love that. I mean, I've dabbled also a little bit in CrossFit and recognize how much of a lifestyle CrossFit is. When you tell me that you are now stepping into this space of CrossFit, and I'm trying to like juxtapose that against like the party girl that you had mentioned earlier, how did you reconcile those two identities? Or did you just leave the party girl behind because that entire lifestyle was no longer serving you and just made that shift?
So I was actually doing CrossFit before I got sober. So I was already kind of used to that. But believe it or not, a lot of CrossFitters still drink. So there was a difficult thing for me where I found myself not getting invited to like certain events like that are like happening with groups of friends in the gym because I don't drink. I think it was like people wanted, didn't want to make me feel uncomfortable. You know what I mean? Right. And I think, everybody's used to that. Not getting the invites anymore when you're sober, not getting the same friends anymore to reach out. I mean, that's pretty common in sobriety. But for my gym family, though, I mean, now they're like, I'll drink a Fit Aid, everybody will do shots, and I got my little Fit Aid cup. So I'm still part of the group, like if we're at the gym doing a workout and have a little, they have little happy hour after, I don't completely eliminate myself that way, but I just know that what I prioritize, and that's, my wellness and how I feel. And I know how alcohol made me feel, and I don't want to feel like that ever again. I don't want to have to wake up wondering where my car is or who did I drunk text or feeling shame, right? Feeling so much shame for the things I would say and I would do. Whew, I did not like that girl. Yeah. And it's just, I know that when I go to the gym, I feel so much better. That burst of endorphins feels so great. And I know now, I'm not going to ruin that because I know some people who will go drink after the gym. That's not what I'm going to do because I'm trying to build muscle. I know that alcohol dehydrates your muscles. I know that it's kind of the opposite effect we want when we're in recovery. We want our muscles to recover. We want our bodies to feel good. The last thing I'm going to do is go drink, and so now I kind of have this approach to for me, my going to the gym, I have to go to the gym. I work out 5 times a week at least because I know that burst of endorphins, it is a natural high, and it feels so good to push yourselves. And then also I just love feeling strong. And so when I know I can PR and lift heavy, and I don't think there's any other better feeling than feeling strong, and so to me, that's my new high. That's what I strive for is feeling fit and feeling strong and being a role model, for my daughter. And she sees me lifting, and she just came up to me a little bit ago because she plays volleyball and she's been doing push-ups. She's showing me her muscles. She's like, look, Mom. So, that's the kind of role model I want to be, I want her to see that and not see, a mom who just wants to drink wine and, be hammered all day.
Yeah. Shout out to you. I love that. There's nothing better than being able to set a strong example for your kids. I think that's fantastic. Now, 4 years in, almost, do you find yourself where your sobriety is ever challenged, or do you feel so secure in your sobriety at this point where it is just kind of, a day-to-day lifestyle for you and you don't find yourself in positions where you're being challenged?
So I do get challenged in a weird kind of different way. I don't think it's so much about I want to drink, but it's my mood alters. Does that make sense? So I don't want to drink. I know I don't want to drink, but I know I can get triggered by something and my mood shifts. For example, St. Patrick's Day, I don't know why, but holidays kind of trigger me. And St. Patrick's Day is one of them because every single one of my friends is out on a party bus or doing something and getting drunk. And so my social media feed is completely full of that. And that makes me feel a certain type of way, So I go to the gym. That's what I do. That's how I respond to feel good about myself. But I know that there's triggers. And so even the holidays are hard for me because, I'm divorced. And so I share custody of my daughter with her father. And so when she is with her dad, that's emotionally triggering for me, and that I kind of go back to that guilt. What if I wouldn't have done that? What if I wouldn't have made mistakes? I would be with my daughter every holiday. And that hurts me a little bit to know that. But I try not to regret things, and I try not to live with feeling shame or regret about something, but it still hurts. It still hurts to be by myself or not have my daughter with me on the holidays. I think so. That kind of makes me feel triggered. And so emotionally, I might get a little emotional. I might get sad, and I try not to allow that to happen so much. But in the past, before therapy, I would have immediately went to the bar. In fact, when I was first when I was first divorced, I couldn't be by myself. It was a reminder every time I was alone that I had failed. So I literally would run to meet up with friends at the bar. I would go to happy hours. If I knew my daughter wasn't going to be with me that day, I would go meet friends for drinks. I constantly had to be with somebody because I couldn't be alone with my feelings. I couldn't be alone. It was this weird thing. now through therapy and like sobriety, oh my gosh, I love my alone time, right? It's like so peaceful. I'm like, I just want to like relax, read a book and just chill. And it's just, I'm so content with who I am. But I wasn't content with who I am straight out of that incident. And even when I was still, drinking. And I think it comes to like, I was ashamed of who I was. I was still hurting from things that happened in my life. And I couldn't own my story at the time. And so I was just walking around with all these feelings of like, I have to go fill that void with something else. Right. And so for me, that was alcohol. And the problem with my drinking though, is like I would drink and the happy hour would turn into the after hours. There was no shut off for me. And then it turned into, let's keep this party going. So I got to get some drugs or something. You know what I mean? And so it was just a very unhealthy, pattern, that I'm so grateful I no longer live in.
Yeah. I mean, I appreciate you kind of calling out the, being able to just, stand in front of your feelings and recognize that even though they're uncomfortable, they're healthy for you to have. And it's important for you to be able to identify where you're at, right? Like I think in those early days, it's almost, first of all, it's hard to know what your why is in the first place, like why you were drinking. I think it takes some folks some time to figure that out. I know it took me a little bit of time to identify exactly what was driving me. But then separate aside from that, like what are your triggers? And you start to recognize that these, triggers can show up in so many like creepy places and shadows that you otherwise like wouldn't even think that it's triggering you. But getting to that point where you can start identifying, because then you can game plan against it, right? And you can start saying like, hey, I gotta get the hell out of here. I gotta go to the gym, and get this blood moving here to push out a lot of these like feelings that are not serving me right now. So I appreciate you calling that out.
Yeah, and I just have to, I do have to give a shout out to my partner, my boyfriend, Brian. He has been like the most supportive person because he was the one who didn't believe I was serious in the hospital, but also because he's been with me. We've been together for more than 5 years. And so he's been with me when I was the wild party girl. And he's been with me now when I'm this, completely different, published author, speaker, and he just thinks it's incredible. And he's like, so proud of me. And he tells me that. And it's so nice to have somebody who's supportive of your sobriety because, I think that is also what makes me keep going, is knowing that I'm having such a positive impact on so many other people, whether they tell me or not. I get obviously DMs all the time from people when they hear about my story. But even people who don't reach out and still are impacted, they're out there, right? So when we're open and when we're vulnerable about our stories, like that's the thing that can happen. And I think that's what's more powerful than anything, that we can show other people that this is possible, even regardless of where we came from or what our stories were, that this is possible. And it's freaking incredible, like to be in control of your life and to be able to say like, I'm not going to drink, and to say that with confidence. Like how great is that to be able to say, I don't drink. Thank you though. It's so fun.
I mean, it's incredibly, empowering to be in the driver's seat of your life. And I feel like for me and for a lot of folks that I've talked to, had it not have been for their addiction, had it not have been for the substance, they may never have even have got to that point where they are as empowered as they are today. So, absolutely. And shout out to your boyfriend for, sticking. I mean, he certainly got like the upside of, this whole
right.
thing.
I'm like, I'm sorry I was crazy. I'm so sorry you had to deal with that.
That's fantastic. Talking about stories, tell me about A Star for Stella.
Oh my gosh. A Star for Stella is this was my dream. I always wanted to be a published author. And so, it's kind of crazy how it happened, but I worked as a journalist for, more than 14 years. I was a newspaper reporter and editor, for the Omaha World Herald newspaper, which is the largest newspaper in Nebraska. And my passion was writing, always has been since I was younger. And I knew that at some point in my life, I was going to write a book. I had no idea I was going to be calling out my skeletons and telling everybody about my sobriety journey and telling everybody how I had failed so terribly. But it's been such a blessing. So really, the book kind of takes you from chapter 1. We talk about the tragic night that really turned everything around for me. And I promise if you start reading chapter 1, you will not be able to put it down because it is, it's very drama filled, very crazy what happens, but it kind of goes through my journey of kind of what we talked about, Ray, just finding the why to live sober and knowing that there was something bigger than me guiding me here, and this purpose that I found along this journey, the purpose to share my story, the purpose to help other people to see that sobriety is possible, to know that we can, make mistakes and we can have really bad things happen to us, but then we can go back and heal those things and work toward healing. And that's okay, and that's, even if it happened 30 years plus late, before, like you can come back and work through things that are haunting you or holding you back. And so that really is the message in my story. And it kind of also kind of talks about how this whole thing happened. It's so bizarre. But when I moved back in 2015, I moved back into my parents' house because I had to get on my feet financially during the divorce. And I was so depressed, Ray, that I literally would cry myself to sleep. I was, I lost custody of my daughter. I felt like a failure. I was miserable in my life. And I said, I know, and I told you this before, but the way that we always, in our family, always came back to feeling strong and empowered was through education. And so I knew I always wanted to get my master's degree. And so I knew I had to go back to school because I was so sad. I had to switch my mindset from being in that dark place to focusing on something that I knew would better me, empower me. And for me, that was education. So while I'm going through a divorce, crazy divorce and custody fight, I'm also going to get my master's degree because I had to refocus my energy. Like I was a literal hot mess and I knew that I had to focus somewhere that I knew could feel good. And so some of my professors knew about my story. They knew I was going through this hard time. And after I was getting ready for graduation, I got a nudge from a professor to apply to be the commencement speaker. And so I did. And, I got selected and I didn't know, but Bellevue University posted my speech on YouTube and it went viral. So more than 6.5 million people now know my story, now know about my skeletons. And here I was so afraid to tell one person, that I had messed up, that I had failed, that I was an alcoholic. But now I get to share that with the world. And, it's kind of taken me to great places. Now I speak, all over and I get paid to speak and share my story. And it's truly incredible. I would have never been here. You know what I mean? If I didn't go through those hard things and accept responsibility for who I am. And so I think there's so much power in owning our story. There's power in believing that no matter what happens in our lives, that we can still be great. We can still be great if we believe we can. And I truly, truly know that because I'm living that.
Love that. I mean, I just love the fact that you've just engaged your life, even when it seemed like that it seemed like something you couldn't win. I mean, to sit there going through a divorce, decide to do a master's degree, write a book, and then put yourself out there to the point where, 6.5 million people now know your story. I mean, I do think that there's something very freeing when you're able to be vulnerable and honest and truthful with yourself, firstly and foremost, and then ultimately, with folks, you who are an audience of your light. I think that's fantastic. So, I mean, shout out to you for that.
Thank you so much.
I have a few questions that I want to ask honestly, I could probably talk to you for another hour and a half. But
I know.
Maybe we'll have a part 2 at some point, but a few questions I want to ask as we kind of close out here, and then I'll let you go. The first question is, in some of the days where you were struggling the most, back in 2014, 13, maybe, when sounds like probably the darker days, how would someone, close to you have known that you had a problem or were struggling without you telling them explicitly?
Oh boy. So I know that my family did recognize around that time because I was drinking by myself a lot. people would invite me places and I would just stay home and say no. And I would end up just drinking alone. And my dad said something to me once and he's like, that's not good for you. You can be a social drinker and drink, but you should not drink alone. But I like drinking alone. I just felt like I didn't, I could just drink and my goal was always to get drunk. Right. So, I could just do it and do it how I wanted to do it. And nobody was around to tell me any different. And so that was probably around that time, actually, around 2014, where I remember my dad saying something to my mom, actually. He didn't want to tell me, but, he had her mention it to me, like, Leia shouldn't be staying home and drinking alone. I was going through some really hard times in my marriage. I was going through some really difficult times in life. And I just wanted to be alone. And I just, and I wanted to drink. And I would actually, we would argue about drinking a lot, me and my ex-husband. And so I remember hiding alcohol bottles. I would hide beer bottles. I would drink like a 12-pack to myself. And then instead of putting them in the trash so he could judge how many I would drink, I would actually hide them in places so that he couldn't find them. And then when he would like leave, I would go and dispose of them. that's the kind of life I was living, I just felt very judged. I felt very alone. So it was a really hard time, but my parents did recognize that and did say something to me, but it didn't change much because I still did it, so.
Yeah. It's all a process, I feel like. And, yes, they may have recognized and maybe you weren't ready, but, maybe for someone else is listening, if someone's close to them recognizes, says something in a loving, trusting, non-judgmental manner, maybe they are ready. So I think that it's important. I've talked to folks who were so great at covering up that nobody knew anything, and sometimes you hear that happening and it's too late when folks actually find out what's been going on. So.
Yeah, there's, there were times where I would get really sloppy drunk and my parents would be really embarrassed. So I would get a lot of phone calls the next day. My dad would be like, you can't act like that. You can't do, you can't do that. And, it was embarrassing. I was very shameful, of how I would act. But, at the same time, I was having so much fun with friends who were acting the same way, that we didn't realize how obnoxious and silly we were, until the next day or till something, got out of hand or, you know what I mean? So it was just that next day shame is the worst thing ever. And I just remember always waking up feeling like having that headache and be like, oh my God, what did I do last night? And having to relive those memories. And then when somebody tells you what you did, it's like the worst feeling on top of that, right? You're like, oh, don't tell me. I don't want to know. But I'm just really grateful I don't have to feel like that anymore. And the cool thing is like, it's like every day is like just this awesome new day. It's not like I have to go backwards. I felt like a lot of times when I was drinking and hungover, like I was going backwards on all the work I had done in the gym. I was reversing maybe all of the mindset work I had done or just everywhere I was in life. Like I felt like I was taking 2 steps back every time I would do that to myself. And I knew I wanted more in my life. And so I just didn't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. And it was like I was praying for a moment and luckily I got mine.
That's amazing. When I think about, when I think about like shame moments, like those post shame moments, I'll be honest with you, even 2 years, almost 2 years into my journey of sobriety, I still think back on stuff that has happened 4 or 5 years ago and still have a twinge of like shame in how like I showed up, in that moment 5 years ago, even though like I've been putting in the work to be a completely, different, person with intention today relative to that time. So, not only is it like a 24-hour cycle, it also can be a much longer cycle depending on like, how much those moments impact you and how embarrassed you are about who that person was. I resonate with you 100%.
But
on that.
I think it is a blessing we get those memories though, because then we get to see how far we've come too,
Totally.
We're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I did that. But then you're like,
and I never want to be there again.
I don't have to do that again.
Yeah.
So glad I don't have to live like that.
I know. I certainly am. Last question, Leah, and then I'll get you going here. for someone who's sober curious, who's on the fence, who's identified, maybe I have a problem, I don't know that I have a problem, but I think that I need to address this alcohol issue, but I just don't even know what the first step would be for me. What would you suggest for that individual?
Oh gosh, I would definitely get coffee with someone who is sober. Let someone's sober story inspire you to find your own why, because I think that's really also what did it for me. My sober sister, she completely inspired me. I was seeing all her gains in the gym. I was seeing her kill it at life. And I was just like, I want that, I want that success right there. And she made it simple. She's like, you can have this. She's like, she told me, and this is something I always say. She said, sobriety is the gift that keeps on giving. And she is so right. And I always say that because she told me that, and she's right, because every year I keep feeling more abundant and greater. And there's so much more out there for us, right? We haven't even tapped into 50% of our potential. Imagine what we could do if we went all in on ourselves, That's the kind of life I want to live. And Joelle, I have to give her a shout out too, because she is my ride or die support sister, my sober support sister. She's the one who really inspired me. So yes, have coffee with someone who is sober and let their sober story just help you find your why.
That's great. That's great. A great tool. Shout out to Elle. Leah, I want to make sure they can find you, engage more.
Yes, you can find me, everything about me on my website. It's leiabaez.com. And I'm also on Instagram. Everything is linked to my website.
Leah, thank you so very much for some time with the Stack and Day going on for some time here. But
and congrats on your sobriety. That's incredible. I love it.
Well, I may not be here if it wasn't for folks like you. I remember, catching wind of your story really early. I probably was one of those 6.5 million views on YouTube.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's stay in contact and we'll speak soon. Okay.
Sounds good. Thanks, Ray. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Stack and Days podcast. If you'd like to get in touch with the show, email me at rdg@stackanddays.com or follow us on Instagram @stackanddays. If you like the podcast, please rate, review, subscribe, and by all means share it with a friend who you think needs to be invited into the conversation. Until we meet again, be well, one day at a time.